Hello and welcome to my channel, The Orchid Hut. My name is Dana, and today's video is going to be an orchid medley chit chat with a variety of topics, including things like how I have rearranged my growing area just a little bit, some new growth, some new spikes, and some really interesting things that are going on with my orchids right now. So as always, thank you so much for the thumbs up if you enjoy this video. The subscribe button is always great, as well as the notifications button to let you know when I've posted something new. So let's get started. The first thing that I want to talk about in this video is the dreariness of the season. So as most of you know, if you've been following my channel, I grow a lot of my orchids, well in fact all of my year-round indoor orchids, in the bay window in my kitchen. And for the last 6 weeks, you know, even before December 21st, which was, you know, the shortest day of the year with the least hours of daylight, even before that, it was just getting so dim and dreary in that bay window. And I decided to make a few changes because I felt like my mini Cattleya orchids that I was growing indoors just simply were not getting enough light. And so I'm going to insert a picture here. This is a photo of the brightest that it would be in my bay window, and this would only have been for about like an hour a day. And then the second photo that I will insert is how it looks most of the time, because the sun is so low in the sky and we have had many overcast, dreary days. And because the weather pattern has been like this for well over 6 weeks now, I just decided to take my mini Cattleyas and move them under the grow lights. So, for example, these 3 orchids that are right here have recently, within the last couple of weeks, been moved under the grow lights where the outdoor orchids are. And at first, what I did is I put them on a shelf where they are about 8 inches away from the light. And after they become acclimated to that, because that's even brighter than what they were getting in the bay window, I will move them to a shelf where the grow light is actually closer to the plant, and then watch very carefully that there's not any kind of burn going on because of that. They have only been there a short while, so I can't really judge yet if having them under the grow lights is a benefit to having them in the window, you know, as compared to having them in the window, but I think I'm going to leave them there because it just seems like the light intensity is probably something that they would appreciate. Okay, so that's one change that I've made. Now, because I moved the mini Cattleyas out of the Bay Area window, I was able to move the Phalaenopsis and the Dendrobiums closer to the glass. And you know, the light is more appropriate for those orchids during the winter because they're lower light orchids as compared to the Cattleyas. And so I'm happier with that arrangement now that it's winter, although I'm going to insert a little bit of a video snippet here. I do from time to time on a really dark day, or especially if there's several dark days in a row, I will supplement with some grow light. So I'll take the grow light and I'll put it in one area for 3 or 4 hours, and then I'll move it and put it, you know, so that it shines on some of the other plants for 3 or 4 hours. So it's just a supplement. It's, you know, by no means completely adequate light, but on the very darkest of days, it probably does help a little bit. Okay, so next topic. And let me do this one next because this one is about to go in the garage, and I'll tell you why in just a second. So this is my Radiata. It's a species orchid. I made a video of it last year, and I'll insert a link in the upper right hand corner. It had a situation where the bulbs were beginning to turn brown and rot, and as you can see right here in the pot, this area of the plant is missing because when I repotted it into this pot, there were bulbs and new growth all in this area, and one by one they were turning brown and rotting, and I had to stay ahead of the game and cut them out and treat this plant until that stopped. And I do think that it was probably some sort of infection, maybe from rainwater. At first I had blamed it on the squirrels because they were burying nuts inside the media, and they might have broken some of the new growth, but there was something else going on as well. But in any case, for the last few months this plant has been fine, although it's missing a chunk right here. But the good news with this orchid is that there were two new growths that were not affected by whatever was going on. And now when I look down at the top of those new growths, and hopefully you can focus in on it there are sheaths developing. So hopefully spring, summertime, I will have blooms from this plant once again. The other good news is that for these new growths, you can see a lot of really good root growth down inside the pot for that new growth. And that was one of the ones that didn't get lost. And then some more right there. So it's developing roots, that's good, and I'm beginning to see bloom sheaths on top of the new growth. So that's a positive. Now, the negative is that when I look really, really carefully right here in between those leaves, I'm seeing just the tiniest bit of that same spider webby, cobweb kind of stuff that the dendrobiums had when the spider mites were active. So I don't know if some spider mites have dropped onto this plant. It is, after this filming, going straight into the garage for a spray with neem oil. And that's one of the things when you have sort of an infestation with something, you have to keep an eye out for the rest of your orchids. Okay, so next up, let's see, where do we start? All three of these are very, very different. Let's do this one next. This is my Maxillaria tenifolia. I purchased it last year, and when it arrived to me in the mail, it had one bloom spike on it. It bloomed, it's the flower with the very, very distinctive coconut scent. And I'll insert a picture of it in this video if I can find it on my computer. But last year when this was growing, it had these three larger pseudobulbs, so 1, 2, 3. And all of this other growth was just the very grassy growth that comes out of the top. And the growth habit of this plant is upwards. So now the new growth that's happening are the new pseudobulbs, and they're all a bit higher than the pseudobulbs from the year before. So this was sort of a grassy growth last year, and now there's a bulb coming out from the center. And if this orchid decides to bloom for me in the spring and in the summer, the blooms will be coming out next to these new little bulbs. So there's actually two here. There's one, and then there's two right there. And then there's 3. There's one down here, 4, 5, right here. And then 6 and 7. So in some places, the grassy growth has produced 1 new pseudobulb, and then in other places it has produced 2. So really nice new growth happening on this orchid right now. In the spring, when it gets warm enough, it will go back outside because that's where it grew last year, and it did well. Okay, so that's an update on that orchid. And then, this one is really exciting for me. This is a species Tolumnia, bahamensis. And I made a video when I took it off of the mount that it came on when I purchased it, and I decided to put it in this piece of koya wood instead. And you may not be able to exactly see, but the roots are really enjoying growing inside that piece of koya wood. But even more exciting than that, and I really do hope the camera can pick up on this because it's no thicker than a thin piece of pencil lead, but right there beneath my finger is a bloom spike. Now, if this actually decides to bloom for me and nothing happens to that spike, then I will do this as a featured orchid and provide a bit more information about this one in that video if it blooms. But it is a spring bloomer, so this little spike right here behind my finger will be all set to bloom in spring. Okay, and then this is the orchid that I purchased at the beginning of the fall, and my husband just laughed hysterically at me. It was these 3 naked bulbs, and then this one newer bulb that had 4 very straggly leaves at the top. And just within the last week, the last 2 leaves yellowed and fell away. And so I've been really anxious for this one to hopefully bloom for me. It's certainly large enough. It had a really nice, strong new growth this year, as well as 3 back bulbs. Even though this first one is a bit shriveled, it was still in good shape. When I did a little bit of research on this one, it said that it could bloom anywhere from November to March, so I was still holding out hope that once it lost its leaves, it would maybe send me a bloom spike. This is one of the Fred Clark Catasetum hybrids. And lo and behold, on this newest bulb, and wow, I'm so anxious to show this to you, but I just don't know if the camera will be able to pick up on it. So right beneath my finger is a little bit of a bud that you can see emerging from the bottom of that. And I'll tilt the camera just a little bit in case it's not quite catching it. So there's the tiniest little green bud right there, which I'm very hopeful will be the bloom spike. And then I believe there's going to be a second one right beneath my finger there. Okay, so even though this one is bare and has no leaves, fingers crossed, you know, I will have 2 bloom spikes from this Catasetum. Okay, so that's the end of our orchid medley chit chat for today. Lots of different orchids here, some things that are changing because of the winter season, some interesting new growth, as well as some interesting new spikes along the way. I do thank you for joining me today, and if you learned something new or like this video, please click the thumbs up button, and talk to you next time.